Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Donald Wallenfang. Thank you for joining me on this live stream entitled Origin and End from Formal Causality to Final Causality. What a joy to be with you. So, the past few live streams I've been thinking about, along with Aristotle and Edith Stein, the different kinds of causality involved in a thing, involved in a being. What kinds of causality are involved? How are they related to each other? Moving beyond a materialist view of reality, of being, uh, toward a comprehensive metaphysical understanding of being and beings, thinking about all of this together. So I want to recapitulate the different kinds of cause, beginning with material cause and then efficient cause. And today, especially continuing to think about formal cause, moving into final cause of a thing. These are very important things, going back to Aristotle's work of his metaphysics and his physics. And it's very valuable for us to study the interrelatedness of all these different kinds of causality involved in the origin and end of a particular being, whether living or non-living kind of being. So if we just recall, again, we recapitulate the different kinds of cause. So under the broad heading of cause in relation to effect, and every being has one. Every being in its moment in its time within its existence, has a beginning and an end. It is an effect of a prior cause. Even the entire universe we can interpret very easily as having been caused because it's in the process of change. It's on the way. It's being as becoming, not being itself. So every being that finds its place in the universe along this temporal flux and this flux of energy, mass, and their interchangeability into one another has its respective cause. So again, the four different types of cause: material cause, efficient cause, formal cause, and final cause. These are what we are going to focus on today, formal and final cause, as primary for a thing's being. But if we think back with Edith Stein, how does she talk about each of these kinds of cause in her German language? Material cause is a voraus, out of which a thing comes. Voraus in German, we would say out of which. The matter involved in a material being's composition, which was already there, it just was transmuted into the being that we're talking about now. Efficient cause, the wodurch in German, wodurch, or that through which a being comes to be. The proximate event of what makes it what it is, through which the chain of events, the sequence of events, the series of events that brings into being this new being, that through which we're getting closer to actuality as we move through these different kinds of causality. And then the formal cause, which I've mentioned in a previous live stream, Stein calls the Wonach of a thing, the according to which, the necessary predetermined form that according to which something is formed, and the idea, the form of its being. So I've used the example of a tiger, for example. Why is there a tiger rather than no tiger? How did we get tiger as distinct from elephant, zebra, panther, cactus, uh, ladybug, and so on? Because we have distinctive forms to begin with. And yes, indeed, we say these forms are in the mind of God. And these forms are through which God creates this variety of beings. And we need to talk about this causality because material and efficient causality in themselves are insufficient to get to origin and ends of beings with precision. So we talk about the forms. I spent a lot of time talking about this kind of causality. I'll talk about it a little more today, and then proceed to final causality, which Stein calls the Wozu. Wozu, that is, into which a thing is formed, is made, becomes into being, into which. So in the case of a tiger, like most mammals, we have something from the father, something from the mother, the sexual reproductive cells that come together and fuse into the zygote stage of development. And the genetic blueprint is there. The teleology, or what Aristotle calls the entelechy of the organism, is there at its inception. And this has only to unfold. And so the tiger grows and develops into the fullness of the formed tiger over the course of time. So we have a final causality that's leading being on, especially living ones, into the perfection of their fully developed being. Formal, final, efficient, material causality. All these various forms of causality, very important to think about. Think about how they are integrated and the unity of causality within a particular being. So we want to think now, going back to formal causality, working our way toward final causality, really the bookends of the cause of a particular being. So I'm going to take commentary from my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, as well as my 2019 book, Metaphysics, A Basic Introduction and a Christian Key. So, formal causality, we best understand this in terms of mathematics and geometry. Again, at the door of Plato's Academy, above the door read, "Let no man ignorant of geometry enter." It is necessary for us to think mathematically, geometrically, to understand the meaning philosophically of formal cause. Jean Grodin, a Canadian philosopher, in his erudite work, Introduction to Metaphysics, From Parmenides to Levinas, writes of how mathematics, more than any other discipline, teaches us that true knowledge pertains to ideal shapes and sizes rather than sensible ones. In mathematics, one must posit intelligible entities, the likeness of which can only be achieved through thought. Mathematical knowledge is apodictic. It is to this type of knowledge that belongs truth, aletheia in Greek, and science, episteme in Greek, in the narrowest sense of the term. So it's a very Platonic thing he's saying here. To get at the essence of a thing is to get at the immaterial form of the thing that precedes and paradoxically follows the material formation and instantiation of this particular being. So Grandin recalls the ancient philosophical observation that our most certain knowledge is that which is not able to be ascertained by sense perception, but is tethered to ideal objects grasped by the mind, or what Plato calls the forms, according to the Greek word eidos and morphe, both of these terms. And also what Edmund Husserl calls eidetic objects for conscious thought. We get at these only through thought, only through conscious thought. It's not just another sense datum. This is the important distinction we must make in philosophy, the distinction between a particular sense datum and the essential forms involved in this integrated sense datum. So what might be an example? If I take the example of this object, this book, its material constitution, There's other things going on than simply the matter that I'm touching, that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing as I rub my hand on the page, perhaps that I'm smelling, not in this case so much tasting. But my senses take in the object. But then I quickly, through thought, abstract from the material object. It's like I say to my body, thank you for allowing me to access this being, this thing. But now I want to get into the heart of its reality, and I'm going to abstract from the matter. And I'm going to say something like a book. Yes, this is a material object, but to say the meaning a book already transcends matter. We're getting into the formal constitution of a thing that we call a book. And the integration of not only matter, but meaning, intelligibility, legibility, involving, yes, concepts, meaning, ideas, forms. The essence is involved in the thing itself. Thought abstracts from the matter. And in this case, through what Thomas Aquinas calls the agent intellect, we are no longer dealing with just matter in motion. When I even say that phrase, it's pointing to a realm of being beyond matter, other than matter, though integrally related to matter. And this is the world of forms. This is the world of thought. This indeed is the world of spirit in relation to matter. It is the realm of intentionality, intelligibility. It is the realm of intellectual coherence, meaning, meaningfulness. Interpretation, interpreting things adequately, relatively, interpreting things in such a way that we're integrating everything according to this greater whole of being we call reality. But who is doing the interpreting? Surely not matter interpreting itself. So, because of our recent human history, going back to the scientific revolution, going back to the invention of the printing press, going back to rationalism in reaction to fideism, going back to the Industrial Revolution and modernism and all these different things, which human beings begin to interpret things oftentimes according to material and efficient causality alone. A reductionism of reality to the hermeneutics of natural science alone. Reductionism of reality to this sense of matter in motion and these various deterministic theories of behavior and being. Rather, in philosophy, we come back to the plain fact that we abstract from matter in thought. And this is not purely a function of matter. There's something else going on. And we want to unmask the unwarranted reductionism of interpreting everything according to matter alone, mass energy alone, atoms and the periodic table of elements alone, even though these have their definite place within the real. But when we're even doing science and making theories and performing experiments and interpreting data, we take for granted too often the spiritual subject involved as the 0 point of orientation. Yes, indeed, the spiritual 0 point of orientation in relation to this world of objects, which we are interpreting, manipulating, measuring, and inquiring into the meaning of it all. And when we're involved in inquiring into meaning, the meaning of being, we are dealing with form in relation to matter, spirit in relation to the material composition of things, and even the material expression of spirit in every material thing, especially living ones like ourselves. The body as a material expression of the spiritual soul, and this medium of making contact with the world Yes, through all of the sense data, but then the agent intellect processing these, integrating these, asking questions about these. So when we're exploring what is formal cause, what is final cause, we're getting into the spiritual ground of the material order of being. And we use the language again of essence, form, meaning, idea, concept, all of these things in which we have the spiritual soul abstracting from the matter, even through the use of the medium of the neurochemistry of the mind, the anatomy and physiology of the whole body. But the body itself is directing all of the sensations to a spiritual processing core of the person. And then we're dealing with ideas, meanings, forms, essences. This is the stuff of thought. Ideal objects grasped by the mind. And to say an ideal object is to say not a material one. An abstraction from a material object, but thinking of its form, its meaning, its essence, its concept. Ideal knowledge, then, is more precise and truthful than sensible knowledge. The world of mathematics, the world of geometry, is more precise and truthful, accurate, exact than sensible knowledge, which, even going back to Descartes and his meditation on the wax and the candle and all these different things, our senses can deceive thought. We might think we're seeing one thing, but it's another. Last night, for example, my bedroom window was open and I heard this crunching of leaves in the backyard, and I heard this movement, and I thought to myself, what could it be? And the fact that I hear this sound doesn't give me exactitude as to what this thing is, what is occurring, what is the being in my backyard. And so I had to get up from bed, peer out of the window, and see what this thing was. And so far as I tell you the story, you don't know either. And I could tell you about the sound the ears heard, but the sound itself did not confirm the being that I heard. I had to join hearing to sight. And then I think I got a better perception of what the thing was making the noise in the backyard. And I peer out the window and I see these antlers, these majestic antlers, at least 12 points. The antlers of a deer, a male deer, a buck, eating some foliage right underneath my bedroom window. And it was probably the closest I've ever been to a buck with the antlers fully formed in the season of fall here in the Midwest of the United States. And it was an encounter. It was a first-rate encounter with being. And then I think the buck kind of saw me and gently walked away in the middle of the night. But the point here is that the senses, we layer them up one on top of the other, and we have a relatively adequate perception and interpretation of a being, of an event. But we have to abstract from the matter to get to the form of the thing. And so I say a male deer, a buck, had antlers, a particular form. It was not a tiger. It was not a human being. It was not an elephant. It was not a squirrel. It was not the wind. But I'm quite certain in the middle of the night, this is what I heard, this is what I saw, this is what I beheld. But to even tell you the story, I don't put the materiality of what happened before you. I tell you through narrative, I tell you through the medium of language, which affects both of our imaginations and brings us to the unity of this abstraction from matter, which is based in a real encounter with matter. But to get at the exactitude of the thing itself, it involves an interpretation of this being and that being, an interpretation of a state of affairs, an interpretation of events. And what we're dealing with in knowing what a thing is getting to its form in relation to the matter that expresses it. Formal cause of a thing. So ideal knowledge is more precise and truthful than sensible knowledge. Mathematical knowledge is apodictic, from the Greek parts apo, from, of, by, with, apo, the prefix, dignai, to show from, of, by, with. Because mathematical knowledge demonstrates the veracity of intellectual objects with absolute, or as close to absolute as we can get, with certainty and precision, through the abstraction of matter. We get to the number of a thing, the vector of a thing, the intelligibility of angles and shapes and mathematical formula, how to find the area of a triangle, the area of a circle, the area underneath a curve. All the stuff of mathematics, of geometry. So something even more certain perhaps than the creature I saw last night is, how many did you see? I saw one. I saw one deer. I saw one. I didn't see 2, 3, 4. I saw one. And this is part of the reality of the encounter with being. There is no rational possibility of refuting an intellectually sound mathematical equation without sacrificing rationality itself. So, for example, 3 times 5 times 7 equals 105. Who wants to contest this mathematical equation involving multiplication? Who wants to contest it? Nobody wants to argue against the straightforwardness of a mathematical equation and the poverty of its intuition, phenomenologically speaking. It's all about the intentionality and the straightforwardness of the intelligibility of the ideal object, this apodictic form. Or something like the Pythagorean theorem concerning a right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, given the self-evident first principle of non-contradiction. These things are very straightforward. There's not much debate about it, unless we get into very advanced theoretical things, which has its place. But to deal with the stuff of architecture, the stuff of engineering, the stuff of computer programming, the zeros and the ones, the stuff of mathematics, the stuff of geometry. The soundness of all this depends on the underlying axioms and postulates that must be assumed, for example, with the Pythagorean theorem to perform Euclidean geometry, such as the whole is greater than the part. Who wants to contest this? It's self-evident. Or all right angles are equal to one another. It's stating the obvious. All right angles are equal to one another. Mathematics and geometry have their own conditions for possibility, and such conditions constitute, in a sense, the formal causality of formal causes. Grondin observes that the first appearance of an unconditioned principle in the history of metaphysics is in Plato's Republic. A first principle that is not a hypothesis. The unhypothetical first principle of everything, Plato says in his Republic. This first principle is principle of all principles, not itself hypothetical, but unhypothetical. While hypotheses are made concerning sentient instantiations of the forms, contemplation on the relations between the forms themselves leads to positing the formal cause of all forms, namely the unconditioned first principle of everything else. This makes sense metaphysically. Again, mathematics teaches us that true knowledge pertains to ideal shapes and sizes rather than sensible ones. Hypothetical knowledge based on sense perception and visible images approximates certainty, but extends its riskful reach from the firm foundation of apodictic, ideal, and intelligible knowledge of formal causes anchored in the first principle of being. So this is talking about the genealogy of epistemological certainty stems from the unconditioned first principle of everything. Yes, what we call absolute being, what we call the uncaused cause, what we call the origin of all secondary points of origin, being itself, yes, divinity, what we call God is the first one. Philosophically, we don't assume all of the content of revelation of a certain religious tradition, but we at least begin with what theology calls a preamble of faith, that this makes more sense than the absence of this first unconditioned first principle of everything else. Hypothetical knowledge based on sense data takes as its point of departure the working assumption that we have a ground to stand on epistemologically for thought. And formal causality is that ground. Even though natural science does not deal with formal causality and final causality directly, it assumes them to make sense of this world of material and efficient causality. It takes them for granted. The formal causality is not a matter of atoms, but is that which can be abstracted from matter and serves as the condition for the possibility of distinct material forms. Why is there this kind of being and that kind of being? So many diverse kinds of beings, because they are differentiated formally at the level of form, not just matter. We say there's different configurations, different quantities of atoms and subatomic particles, of different kinds of molecules. Yes, this is all true, but the matter is simply being obedient to the form that goes before and behind it. And the form that goes before and behind every episode, every instance of material being is what we're meaning by formal and final cause of the thing. The form determines the configuration of the matter, not the other way around. The form configures the matter. We don't end up in the wake of involuntary matter with an interpretation of forms. Matter configures a certain way because of the formal cause acting on the passivity of matter. This matrix of mass energy that we study in natural science and physics and chemistry and biology, anatomy, physiology, this matrix of mass energy is entirely susceptible to formal causality. Formal causality is the act in relation to the potency of material configuration of a being. Because the proton, the neutron, the electron, for example, there's no will there. There's no intentionality there. They're completely malleable, manipulatable, susceptible as potency in relation to an actual being acting on the matter, not for the first time. So we're drawing the distinction, again, in the abstract through thought between form and matter, between cause and effect, between act and potency. This is the stuff of classical metaphysics. And it is form that is responsible for the peculiar and diversified configurations of matter. Formal causality is the only way to think adequately the distinction of the different forms of being that fill the universe. Let's think more about this. Formal causality. Just as mathematics is a precursor for measurement, metaphysics is a precursor for physics. Material and efficient causality have their origin in formal causality. Without the given principles and forms of being and logic, there would be no sense to be made of anything because nothing would have shape, proportion, essence, or meaning. Again, the act of thought that abstracts from matter puts us into touch with the truth about the forms in relation to the matter that we deal with in thinking. This is why the philosophy of Plato remains a perennial contribution to rationality, because Plato recognized the stability, immutability of form in relation to matter. Stability, reliability, immutability, apodictic certainty of the form in mathematics and geometry, much more so than any kind of apodictic certainty in relation to objects, material objects, and sense data through which we encounter them. In addition to mathematics and geometry, this is very interesting. Sonorous music is based on intrinsic tonic ratios and logarithmic relationships between different pitches. So thinking about the liberal arts, the quadrivium of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, we think not only in terms of mathematics and geometry, granting us access to apodictic knowledge of forms and essences of being, but also music and the relationality between sounds and sound waves. In the ancient worlds, philosophers were very interested in music also. And for them, music, right alongside mathematics and geometry and astronomy, the observation of the orbits, the movements, the activity of celestial bodies, brought them into contact with the foundation of being and beings. So to think about music in terms of the formal composition of music, think of a Beethoven symphony, for example, let's say Symphony 7. There's a score. There's an arrangement of pitches and meter according to the measures of the music. And there's sound and there's absence of sound. There's the rests in the score. And the symphony is composed, first of all, of form in relation to a material production of the music. We detect form through music, ordered sound, ordered rhythm, and it moves our spiritual souls, not just the matter and motion of our bodies. Music means things. And to say that music means something, we're not talking about atoms. We're talking about the material medium of the sound production. But the meaning that the composer wanted to convey through the music originates in the formal conception of the composer's mind and heart. He doesn't begin with sound waves. He's not concerned with measuring them, but he recognizes intuitively their interplay and what makes for sonority and the back and forth between consonance and dissonance in the sounds. And so we have a Beethoven Symphony 7 thanks to form and the score and all the parts of all the different instruments in the orchestra, and then playing together under the baton of one conductor that unifies the effort, the performance, the activity that brings to life the forms expressed through the material media of the sound production and the material instruments performed through the material bodies of the musicians. This is a philosophy of music, which we seldom do. We seldom do in this world of thoughts. So many of us rely on music to lift our spirits. That playlist, those favorite songs. And why do we gravitate toward music? Because it means something. It moves us. It moves us according to emotion that is deeper than matter and efficiency, but has to do with form and finality of not only matter but meaning. There's a teleology of meaning, and this is the stuff of spirits. So music brings us to these mysterious realities of our existence that brings us into touch with formal and final causality. So in music, the unison, the minor third, the perfect fifth, the perfect octave, these different kinds of pitches that express a mathematical proportionality, a mathematical configuration of sound in relation to the various waves, pitches. For instance, the perfect octave above an A pitch tuned to the standard 440 hertz, the note with which the oboe intones the intonation of the entire orchestra. A 440 hertz, the sound wave. The perfect octave above that will sound at 880 hertz so that the sound waves oscillate at a perfect ratio. So it looks like this in music. And when we have two notes that are in tune, it's because they're being sounded with the perfect ratio of the sound waves. They're lining up. And those of us who play music or have played music, we hear harmonics that light up when even two pitches are played simultaneously. We hear a third, we hear a fourth. There's a creation of sound, of being, of meaning, thanks to the formal proportions and relations of sound waves. These symmetrical relationships are the basis for musical intonation, sonority, and harmony. Further, musical composition is organized according to time, thereby opening the possibility of rhythm. If music is rhythmic, it is due to a perceived tempo according to which successive sound events are related. In his 1939 book, What to Listen For in Music, American composer Aaron Copland identifies the following four elements of music: rhythm, melody, harmony, and tone color, sometimes called timbre. Such elements stem from the ideal mathematics of music. Rhythm is the punctuation of time by creating meter. Melody is the undulation of space by sound waves. Harmony is the balanced logarithmic relation among various sound waves. And tone color is the timbre or quality of a particular sound determined by the presence of overtones and the specific apparatus producing the sound. overtones. Again, when two notes are playing, say a major third, played with such precision, and the interaction of those two sound waves, we hear additional ones. We hear additional sounds in relation to the two. And all this is due to the formal causality of sound. The underlying formal metrics of music, the formal causality of music, serves as the basis from which all tonality and rhythm originate. All science and truth-telling is based on such apodictic knowledge as that revealed in mathematics, geometry, and music. Even the basic term, information, attests to the validity of formal causality and the givenness of ideal objects. Every phenomenon of information consists of an intangible, immaterial, formal component. Eidetic knowledge is comprised of the formal world of information. So even that very common word, information, which we deal with all the time in all these different fields of study, says form, right in the heart of it. Every bit of information is a circulation of form, a trading on form. Formal causality, as evidenced in the classic quadrivium of liberal arts studies, refers to the information, the forming, the formal causes of all finite and created existence beings. So we might even think about our bank accounts, for example. Our bank accounts are held in existence by form, by numbers. I could go online and look up my bank account and be reassured that there's these numbers in there, more or less, but a close proximity to what I hope I would see. It's not that the money I possess, I have in my hands all the time, but the money I possess is held in possession by such an immaterial signification of numbers on the screen. And what's more real even than dollar bills I might hold in my hands is the bank certifying that I have X amount of dollars, and we can see the history of the transactions. And if there was a discrepancy, we would go to that history and see what's happened. Where did the numbers go? But isn't it interesting that something that we depend on so much in our daily economics of living is held in place by this form, the information of the account holdings. So something like a bank account that you see through the screen, the mobile device, the computer, you could print out the numbers, signifies the money that's there to spend or to save or do whatever one wants with. But we're assured enough of seeing the form, of seeing the numbers. We don't need to demand, I need the bills in my hands. I need the bills in my possession, in my wallet, in my house. I need them there of a certain currency. You know, even the transfer of currencies from one nation to another is based on the stability of the form of the value of the monetary value. This is something of form. This is not just a purely material reality. So money itself, currency, transaction, what you see in your bank account on the screen, we're dealing with form and abstraction from matter. If this were not the case, all of us would insist on the reductionism of our bodies, on the possession of material things only in relation to the material body, but we don't do that. What we deal with more often than not is form rather than matter. All the ideas we think throughout the day, everything going on in thought, is the stuff of form. And the material brain is used as a medium to access the sensible worlds and to process to some degrees through the neurological configuration of the brain the sense data. But it's handed over then to the spiritual soul to integrate the spiritual soul, united so closely with the body, that is expressing itself in and through the mind, through what I'm doing right now, speech, language, the ordering of meanings. And yes, my brain is involved, but my brain is not producing the meanings, it's mediating them. It's mediating the world to the soul and the spiritual soul's interpretation of the worlds back to the worlds, especially to the world of subjective spiritual being that is ourselves as human beings, as rational agents who deal with information, who deal with form, who deal with cause and effect, who deal with all of these metaphysical meanings and realities. So again, to try to wrap up formal causality and move into final causality, formal causality refers to the anterior network of essential being according to which all finite beings are determined. Relative degrees of belief are required for all assertions of knowledge and truth, even very material ones. However, the degree of belief demanded to assent to the reality of formal causality is rationally little greater than that demanded to assent to the reality of material and efficient causality. It is true that formal causality deals with invisible, non-spatial, and non-temporal entities, such as the circle as such, the triangle as such, the number 2 as such, in the abstract, mathematically, geometrically. So it's true that formal causality deals with that which is immaterial, invisible, non-spatial, non-temporal, while material and official causality deal with visible, spatial, temporal entities. Yet material and efficient causality themselves beg the question of their reason for being and pointing subliminally to formal causality as we abstract from matter in thought. As it turns out, formal causality is both the efficient cause of efficient causality and the spiritual cause of material causality. According to Aristotle's classic conception, all matter is formed matter. This general worldview is called hylomorphism, from the Greek words hule, which means matter, and morphe, that means form. So this doctrine of hylomorphism, a being has its matter and form. No matter is without form, though there can be form without matter, for example, in the case of angelic beings or eidetic objects, the worlds of ideas, concepts, essences, forms, geometry, mathematics, and indeed musical intentionality and intuition. The relation between form and matter stems from the more fundamental relation between act and potency. As act is to potency, so form is to matter. Formal causes are the actuality behind their material manifestation. For example, there must exist an actual form of bird before bird as such can be awakened into existence materially. Why is this so? It is because the evolutionary potential of matter to assume the form of bird as such requires a predetermined eidetic or formal constitution of birdness before it can materialize the material particular species of bird. Act precedes potency. Again, matter does not precede form, but form always precedes matter, since any conception of matter, whether on a macro or micro level, is always already formed matter. Any particle, no matter how small, is always already a formed particle in relation to other micro and macro particles, as well as in relation to the macro forms that are constituted by such particles, all in relation to a greater whole. For instance, if I were to ask what came first, the formal constitution of subatomic particles or the formal constitution of the periodic table of elements, what came first? The formal constitutions of protons, neutrons, and electrons, or the formal constitution of elements like hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. What came first? Answer, neither, because formal causality implies the simultaneous realization and interdependence of subatomic particles, elements, molecules, and larger individuated existence. Further, all of these categories imply the coexistence of unity, multiplicity, polarity, motion, energy, and space-time. Cosmos means order, and order implies formal causality and the actuality of determinate forms for the inert potentiality of indeterminate prime matter. This is the stuff of metaphysics. Getting at the truth about being and beings, the precise relationship between cause and effect of first principles and second, third, tertiary ones. So, having covered material, efficient, and formal causality at this point, we want to think about one more type of causality that remains to investigate in order to arrive at an adequate understanding of being in terms of cause and effect. This world of becoming, being as becoming, that we call the universe, the material, observable universe. Who's doing the observing? Not matter. Something that transcends matter, is other than matter ontologically, we call spirit, we call subjectivity in relation to objectivity, we call personhood, we call rationality. The last type of cause is related most directly to formal causality and can at times appear to be one and the same as formal causality. All motion and activity in the universe beg the question of whither. That is, to what point is everything heading? Why do things act towards certain ends? This is the truth about everything in biology. This is the truth about everything in chemistry. This is the truth about the four fundamental forces or laws of nature: nuclear strong force, nuclear weak force, electromagnetic force, gravitational force. There's a teleology of nature. Things, beings act toward predetermined ends. They're not making the ends up as they go. They've been set in advance. These bookends of beings, formal cause and final cause. So, what is the end of being, of all this motion, of this universe, of all this life? What is the end of it all? And what is the purpose of it all? Why is there something rather than nothing? And why does this something evolve? Why do beings act toward these predetermined ends? For what purpose? What grand purpose of this cosmos? Why is it a cosmos rather than a chaos? Why are there all of these incredible forms of being, so many diversified kinds of being rather than just one type? Why so much diversity? Why so much harmony and yet unity? Why do we as rational persons act toward purpose, with purpose? Why did we wake up this morning and do what we're doing? Why do we have desire? And why is desire tethered to predetermined ends, purposes of action? While formal causality inquires about the question of origin or beginning, the last type of causality inquires about the question of ends, of destiny, of destination. This is why the fourth kind of causality is termed final causality. Formal causality begs the question of whence, from where did everything originate? But final causality begs the question of whither, to where is everything going? To what great cosmological end? So again, to recall the four different kinds of cause: material, efficient, formal, and now we're thinking about final cause. Again, this is commentary from my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, and also want to bring in my 2019 book, Metaphysics, as a basic introduction. So formal causality, according to which a thing is, that formal pattern that gives shape to the matter, that gives a particular configuration to the matter, that we say there is a star, there is moon, there is H2O, water, there is hydrochloric acid, there is mercury, there is earthworm, there is fruit fly, there is human being, there is armadillo, there is emperor penguin. All of these different kinds of being is tremendous. This is the fundamental joy of natural science, is the contemplation of the form, these diversity of forms. And final causality is asking the into which a particular being is formed and fashioned, into which, in the end. So these two, formal and final causality, are the bookends of a being, the origin and end of a being, why it is what it is in this rapid flux of temporality, in this material universe, but not just material, because we're talking about it, we're abstracting from the matter, material spiritual universe, but into which a thing has been formed for a definite purpose in its being, according to which, into it. So let's think for a bit about final causality. How is it different and yet united with formal causality? So Aristotle defines final causality as the end, or in Greek, the telos, or that for the sake of which a thing is done, a thing is accomplished, an event happens in the universe because of all of these various ends that have been planted and inscribed within it, that make motion purposeful, meaningful. Being goes somewhere. Final causality deals with the ends or goals of action. The science of final causes in metaphysics is called teleology, from the Greek word telos, end, goal, purpose. If something is in act or motion, it acts or moves toward a predetermined or intended goal. And not just in the case of rational agents like ourselves, which is most obvious. We can't deny this at all. We act toward predetermined, perceived ends or goals of action. We act with purpose. We act with conation. We act with desire and striving for a perceived good. So morally, the first principle of practical reason, do good and avoid evil. It's self-evident. It's obvious. We act, therefore, with purpose according to our interpretation, our perception of the good. This is good, this is lacking in goodness. This is good, that is lacking in goodness. But this is also the case that every bit of matter in the universe moves, acts toward predetermined ends or goals, something like gravitational force, where we have objects in proximity to one another and there's an attraction. And we have electromagnetic force, this attraction and repulsion. And so we get orbits. That planet Earth is orbiting around the sun, around this star, in this particular solar system, in this little corner of the universe, is because of these fundamental forces of nature. Electromagnetic force, gravitational force. The Earth orbits, it turns on its axis, it turns back and forth on its axis, and so we have seasons. All of this motion, all this movement is due to predetermined laws of nature, like gravity. Why gravity and not gravity? Why polarity within the micro level of molecular composition rather than not polarity? Why differentiation of the positive and negative charges within atoms and molecules? The nuclei in relation to the electron orbitals. And all of this is the musical score of the maker of the universe. The forms in the mind of God. There's a script, there's an architecture, there's a sonorous score, and the divine will awakens into being that which had no being, according to the score that has a first note, a first chord, and a final one. And it has caesuras, and it has dynamics, crescendo and decrescendo. It has various volumes and amplitudes of sound. And so, as we conduct a philosophy of music, it's an integral part of this metaphysics of being that helps us understand, always by way of analogy, the relationship between God and creation. We think, again, in a very obvious way about biological organisms. Every living organism adapts to a given environment, which too is constantly evolving, by developing specific traits that will promote not only its individual survival, but more significantly, the survival of its own species over the course of time. Such biological adaptations occur on the basis of a set purpose, subsistence of life. Why? Why do living organisms want to live rather than die? There's a lot of trouble involved in living. There's a lot of dynamics in living. Why not just get on with it and die? Why the perpetuity of life through the living organisms? Why is it better to live than to die? Why does life prevail over death? Why is there life at all? Why are there configurations of material bodies that we call living, that involve nutrition, hydration, metabolism, growth, development, and in some cases, locomotion, and in some cases, like that of ourselves, rationality? What is the whence and the whither of all these different kinds of being and what they're doing in a pre-programmed kind of way? What the cats are doing, the squirrels are doing, the birds are doing, because of what they are, because of the quadratic causality involved in their peculiar being, materially efficient, formal, final, because of the inbuilt laws of nature of the universe, because the script of life has been ordained on this planet Earth. And we can obey it or disobey it. Such adaptations in biological organisms occur on the basis of a set purpose, the subsistence of life. The cosmic order is laced with teleological attributes that determine the rhyme and reason of all cosmic activity. We discover what they are over the course of time through natural science, for example. We don't invent them. Because we talk about gravity, it's not a product of man. It's no invention of man. It's a scientific theory on what already is the case about being. But why gravity rather than not gravity? Whether our optical contemplation about the universe is large or small, teleology is on display everywhere. Chemical processes happen according to the predetermined ends of molecular interaction. Interactions among various living and non-living species of beings transpire according to the given demands of organisms such as nutrition, hydration, and reproduction. Principles such as homeostasis, inertia, unity, alterity, polarity, and complementarity determine the activity of all physical phenomena in the universe. Why these patterns? Why these consistent patterns about being? What Gerard Manley Hopkins calls the inscape or the in-stress of the pattern of the mind of God and the small created thing. And we just named the why. For there to be movement, there must be more than one. For there to be movement, there must be one. This is to say that the interaction of a multiplicity of existence depends on the difference among respective existence, and yet the unity of existence, of all these beings, according to the ground of being itself. Similar to formal causality, final causality observes that for the sake of which a thing is done, final causality, for the sake of which a thing is done, according to its prescriptive whither end goal purpose. It acknowledges that all activity is purposive activity according to predetermined origins and ends. So to continue to say predetermined, we're referring to the formal and final causality of beings, the origin and end of this being and that being. It's been assigned, it's been ordained, it's been appointed from an elsewhere other than the being itself. Because the being itself, there was a time it was not there, it's going back to non-existence, and it did not awaken itself into being. It is not the cause of this change it's undergoing. Any being that's undergoing change cannot be the same cause of the change it's undergoing. By definition of what we mean by change, what we mean by becoming, what we mean by moving from cause to effect, what we mean by moving from act, potency, actualized into now this actualized being. Like formal causality, final causality reaches beyond material and efficient causality by recognizing the innate goals inscribed not only in physics, but in rational volition as well. The latter concept implies the uniqueness of human freedom and the fact that final causes can be consciously chosen by rational beings by virtue of intellect and self-mastery, even though the ends of action remain predetermined by the scripted patterns of the natural order. The inscape of origin and end, the inscape of formality and finality. Within the finite being, there is an inscape of a predetermined pattern of being to which this particular instance of matter is obedient, is docile, and is a giraffe, or is a hippopotamus, or is a rhinoceros, or is a cheetah, or is this particular species of palm tree, or is a swordfish. In any event, final causality transcends the determinism of physics by including its totality of being and the latent possibilities implicit in its evolutionary path. So we can talk about formal and final causality in relation to non-living kinds of being. We can talk about formal and final causality in relation to biological organisms and growth, development, reproduction, evolution. But still, for ourselves, this is not enough. we need to apply formal and final causality to rationality itself. And this is of an entirely spiritual order of being, of a peculiar kind, which can't be reduced to matter in motion, which can't be reduced to observations of consistent patterns of biological forms of being. But rationality implies volition, implies will, implies the potentiality to a greater opening we call freedom, implies the abstraction of matter and turning and facing it and contemplating it, the relationship between theory and praxis, the relationship between contemplation and ethics, the stuff of love and responsibility and virtue and value. So when we're thinking about all these different kinds of causality, we're not reducing it to the stuff of natural science, though natural science involves, especially these first ones, material and efficient. Natural science tends to mention formal and final causality in passing with the tropes of Mother Nature, evolution, why does this being evolve over the course of time? Because of evolution. It's calling the formal cause by different names, but essentially that's what we're getting at here. The inbuilt patterns and laws of nature according to which organisms grow, move, evolve, do what they do. And final causality, if something grows, develops, and evolves, there's a telos out at the end of the growth, movement, development, evolution. And that's why it's growing and developing and evolving toward this predetermined end, the perfection or fulfillment of the organism, of the being in the state of becoming, of evolving. Edith Stein uses the German Entwicklung toward that end. Otherwise, we wouldn't have growth, evolution, development. But these are the things we must think about philosophically as to answer the question, why adequately? Why is this being what it is? Why does it evolve? Why does it grow and develop? Why does it reproduce? Why is it this rather than that? Because of formal and final causality in relation to efficient and material causality. So I really like to wrap up about final causality in this live stream. So I'm going to push to the end of this reflection because I know these things aren't popular. I know they're very dry, but if you're listening to this content, hopefully you see how wonderful and exciting it is, how alive these concepts are, these questions about causality. And going back to Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Edith Stein, thinking about the manifold causality of a particular finite being in relation to infinite eternal being. So in German, Stein refers to the final cause as wozu, that is, into which a thing becomes. It evolves into this or into that. The final cause is that into which the thing is formed. It is what the thing is becoming and later will be. Aristotle uses the Greek word entelecheia to refer to that into which a thing is formed. Entelechy refers to the formal blueprint of a living organism's being as it is determined upon the organism's biological conception. The blueprint, the architecture is already there at the inception of the living being. It's not a question, what will it become? It's already there in seed, in embryo, and it has only to unfold over the course of time. The blueprint contains already the finished product of the organism's growth, development, and natural activity. The genius of an organism's full maturity is already present in its seed or the earliest stage of being. It has only to evolve. And Edith Stein writes in her book, Finite and Eternal Being, quote, The human being who attains to his or her end does not thereby become a pure form, but rather a perfect image or copy of the pure form we call human. And whether the person attains to the end or not, the person bears within the self the seed of the end. I love how she says that. Every living organism bears within itself its entelechy, the seed of its end, its peculiar form to which it is unfolding, to which it is tending. The person's entelechea, understood now as the end structure, Stein uses the German word Zielgestalt, rather than as a perfection of being, is actuating within that person from the very beginning of that person's existence. But this entelechea is not the only actuating force. And for this reason, it may happen that its formative power cannot fully actualize itself, sich auswirken. So there can be interference in organisms, in a human beings, for example's uh, um, unfolding of being, perfection of its individual being according to the seed of the end, the form we call human, whether male or female. So she says we must therefore distinguish from the pure form of human being as such, as male, as female, which stands above the evolution as a guiding archetype. That vital law which actuates in the process of evolution itself and determines this evolution with respect to and in the direction of the end. So thinking of the unity of formal and final cause of a being in terms of the guiding archetype of the organism of the being, the guiding archetype, the guiding form, the pure form, which is the necessary condition of possibility for matter to be configured in this peculiar kind of way. The pure forms precede the material manifestation and the material expression of the purity of the forms. And the pure form of an organism that has a beginning and an end, a growth and development and evolution. Again, the beginning is the formal cause, and the end toward which the organism grows, develops, and lives is the final cause. So life itself, what we mean by biological life, bios in Greek, itself contributes to the formal and final causality of a biological organism, that there is something we call life, that life itself directs what's going on with the organism, why it strives to live and not die, according to the teleology of life. This is what we're getting at with formal and final causality. So another term used to describe the full maturity of an organism is its perfection, or we could say its fullness, its completeness. Perfection signifies the point at which the organism's growth and development has reached completion or fullness. It refers to the goal at which the organism was aiming in its growth, development, and activity all along. For inanimate objects, entelechy also applies to the rock, to the minerals, to the molecules of water. For example, these various kinds of elements, molecules. Entelechy also applies insofar as all physical objects are in motion in their subatomic particle movements and evolution. Radioactive decay is just one of many examples in which subatomic particles undergo constant mutation and modification. The entelechy of inanimate objects is determined by formal and final causality of natural laws, again, as I mentioned before, such as the four fundamental forces of the universe, the four laws of thermodynamics, and by the inherent principles of being, such as otherness, polarity, unity, in and through the polarity and alterity of the different kinds of being, at the micro level as well as the macro level. So in her book, Finite and Eternal Being, Edith Stein refers to the final cause of the human being as the perfection of the human being, the fullness, the fulfillment, all these attributes that contribute to what we mean by human being, the full flourishing of them. So, to be a rational creature, education serves the fulfillment, the perfection of the nature we call human, the rational nature. Without education, without study, without investigation, without asking all these questions, reason is left underdeveloped in a person. It doesn't disqualify the pure form of human that is with every human being, no matter male, female, old, young, able, disabled, and so on. But the impotentia of the pure form of human is there as the seed of the end, as the entelechy of every human being so conceived. But the variety happens in terms of the development or lack thereof of something like rationality, of certain talents, of certain abilities, of certain kinds of meaningful work. And all of this is a function of nature, nurture, and various kinds of formation of desire, all kinds of formation of the person, intellectual formation, moral formation, religious formation. Is it there or not? Determines how a person is living, their patterns of behavior, what kind of decisions are being made and why, what kind of values are being lived toward with the person. So a concept like value itself serves as a final cause for ethical action. I act toward this predetermined value that I see according to a hierarchy of values that I'm negotiating between greater and lesser ones. So, what we mean by formal causality in terms of rational, meaningful, purposeful action is based on the values perceived, the values in sight. Altogether, a human being grows and develops toward maturity from an embryonic stage to that of adulthood. Not only does the body naturally increase in size and ability over time, the soul is formed progressively to fullness and completion as well. One could say that the perfected human being is especially one who is perfected in virtue and self-giving. The difference between virtue and vice, the difference between giving of oneself and being stingy, is plain to see. So this is the express purpose of education. As Plato said, education is paideia. That is the bearing of a fruit, a progressive formation according to the pure form that we call human and its full development and perfection of the being. This moving toward intellectual and personal perfection according to the transcendental formal causes of being, namely beauty, goodness, and truth, and their unity in terms of the erotic striving, yearning, conation of the rational agents toward what is perceived to be beautiful, good, true, and the unity of these, the harmony of these Platonic transcendentals. So perfected being lies ahead as an end, and as such effects the evolution which leads this new being toward its proper end. The final cause of a human being propels the evolution of the person toward his or her predetermined end, both intellectually and physically. Final causality exerts a gravitational pull on a being to shape its evolution toward what it is to become. Final causality teams with formal causality in determining the intrinsic nature of a being and its existential purpose. Edith Stein writes in her book Potency and Act, quote, we may go on with Aristotle to distinguish that into which the thing is formed and from that according to which it is formed. So she's saying with Aristotle, we can distinguish between final cause and formal cause, the final cause being into which a thing is formed, the formal cause being according to which a thing is formed. That is the guiding archetype of the being, the formal cause. That is the idea and what the thing is becoming and later will be. That into which the thing is made, if we take it to mean the concrete thing that it is to be, is not included among the causes of its becoming, but its result, the final cause. If we take it as the species, however, whose instance the individual will become, it does not differ from the according to which aspect the ideal species. So Edith Stein is saying with Aristotle, we can think of final cause in these two different ways, a very subtle distinction here. Again, the first, if we think of final cause to mean the concrete thing that the being is to be, let's say the biological organism is to become, the fully grown lion, for example, which is not the cub, but the fully grown lion, the concrete thing, that the end result, the telos itself, is not exactly a direct cause. It's not included among the causes of the things becoming, but we're simply referring to the result, the end itself that arrives eventually. But if we think of the final cause in terms of the pure form of the specific kind of being as the species whose instance the individual will become, then there's a unity between final cause and formal cause. We're saying the same thing with the two different words, formal and final. The according to which, the pure form of the thing that drives its evolution, growth, development, maturation. So there's a subtle distinction there with how we're thinking about final cause in relation to formal cause. Edith Stein, she further argues that if thus the end effects the evolution, if the final cause effects the evolution of a being, and if only something actual can actuate, the end obviously must have actuality prior to the time the movement of the evolving thing or being reaches this end and is thereby actualized. So a very strong argument for the truth about final causality, that the final cause must already be actual for the potencies of the organism to be actualized according to the final cause, that is the act toward which the potencies are being actualized. It is the target that's already there at the end, toward which the organism is evolving. It is certain that evolutionary patterns are governed by teleology, that is, final causality. Anytime we attempt to give an explanation of why a particular being changed or adapted in a specific way, we inevitably point to some purposive cause of the change or adaptation. For example, in discussing the evolution of venom in some species of snakes, for example, the inland taipan, like in Australia, a herpetologist may reference natural selection or evolution as the causal agent of the favorable genetic mutation in the snake that promotes the survival of the species. However, neither natural selection nor evolution per se is a material and efficient cause. Such concepts are not individual beings or among the material elements of nature. They are abstract terms that suggest a causal agency other than that which could be manipulated and measured as a finite datum in a laboratory of physical science. So, in other words, natural science has its meta-narratives that implicitly refer to formal and final causality without calling them that. So if a natural scientist says it's because of natural selection that this particular kind of snake evolved with this particular kind of venom, it's still implying not just the matter that has mutated over time, and now we have it participating in this inland taipan kind of snake and this venom of the snake, but it's implying the according to which this particular kind of snake is evolving. And to say natural selection or evolution doesn't quite get us at the precision, the philosophical precision of formal cause, according to which a thing is formed. The form that predetermines the material configuration of this specific kind of being. And also, every kind of evolution implies a final causality toward which it's evolving. And so the inland taipan, we have an evolution of the snake and the venom with the snake that makes it more effective at killing its prey to eat, as well as protecting itself from another kind of predator. And so the venom acts with purpose in relation to the purpose of nutrition and hydration, growth and development, evolution of the organism, and the perpetuation of the species. And all of those things together, we have to go philosophically to formal and final causality to think about being in a much more comprehensive way than just first, next, then finally, in terms of efficient causality, or that this matter, this hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, was here in this being and then made its way into that one and then made its way into that one, as radically passive kind of being that matter is. But we need to point to the active agency that actually causes different kinds of being to be, all the while they're becoming, and that allows them to have a beginning and an end, which implies a form and a finality toward which that form is growing, developing, and being actualized. So back to act and potency within metaphysics. So for natural science, these terms of natural selection and evolution are signifiers, actually, of formal and final causality, often not coming clean with the metaphysics being presumed in the grammar. Natural selection implies an abstract natural law by which biological species survive according to their degree of successful adaptation to their environments. Biological evolution, too, implies an abstract natural law that governs the genetic mutations of species over the course of time, according to the natural tendency toward life and survival, and the thriving of an organism and a species within a particular environment. And what to say, a particular environment, it's living and non-living too, and that has a teleology about it just as well. There's a parallel teleology running across all different forms of being. So there's not these static environments according to which living beings are evolving, here this one, there that one. The environments themselves are evolving. Everything's evolving in relation to each other, next to each other, in symbiotic relationships we call ecosystems. So the ecosystem of evolution is determined by formal and final causality ultimately. Even though the natural sciences are confined to the boundaries of material and efficient causality, their meta-narratives seldom avoid overt appeal to formal and final causality through consistent nomenclature. Whenever an argument is made that suggests that something evolves in order to, it is final causality to which the argument makes its appeal. This particular organism evolves in order to live, in order to be a more effective predator, whatever. That in order to, that is talking about the why the evolution is happening, gets us to the cause of the why, which isn't just the fluctuation of matter, isn't just that there was the parent and now there's the offspring and the efficient causality between the two, but it's referring to the greater cosmological rationale for a being to evolve in a particular way for the sake of living, for the sake of perpetuating the species. Formal and final cause. Whenever we abstract from matter in our thought processes to think about these kinds of things, it is formal and final causality to which our conscious deliberations attest. Abstraction consists, again, of the eidetic objects of consciousness, ideas, concepts, forms, essences, meanings, eidetic objects of consciousness. It's a spiritual phenomena, spiritual realities, spiritual kinds of being. The objective idea is not made of atoms. The geometric form circle itself, circle as such, is not yet made of atoms. The wheel, the frisbee, the plate, these things are made of atoms. But the architecture precedes the material manifestation of the thing. And it's this, through the process of abstraction, that thought comes into contact with and proves over and over again the relation of form to matter, the relation of spirit to matter. And this teleological manifestation in the world of being, abstraction thinks about it. Whenever we recognize that a particular potency is actualized, we are met with the basic ontological premise that the actual form and end caused the actualization of the potency in the act of the being's becoming. We don't have a movement from potency to act without a prior actuality that actualizes the potency. And that prior actuality that actualizes the innate, the latent potency is ultimately form and finality, formal causality, final causality, origin and end. There's an actuality of origin and end in relation to the being that is in the process of becoming. And the process itself is not identical to the origin and end, but always related to it. There is a process, there is becoming because of the origin and end that are already there, that are already actualized, that assign this peculiar form of being and its peculiar way of becoming in the world of being. Again, to become is for a potency to be actualized. A potency that exists in the first place because it has been actualized already as a potency in relation to acts. Final causality and formal causality intersect as the two poles of becoming. These two poles are constantly present in any and every finite being, from the beginning to the end of the being's lifespan. This is so because the beginning of a being's existence, which is determined by a formal cause, and the end of a being's existence, determined by its final cause, coexist at every stage of the being's becoming. In light of formal and final causality, beginning is end, and end is beginning. The full form of the being is the goal, and the fulfilled goal of the being is its incipient form. So you see how formal and final causality dovetail. They form a unity of the pure form of the being in relation to its various stages of temporal becoming. Both formal and final causality mark the actuality of the being that is necessary for the being to exist at all. With the formal and final actuality of a being in place, a being then can become according to and into which it is designated and predestined to become. Again, that's the language of formal and final causality right there. According to which is the formal cause, and the into which it becomes is the final cause. A being becomes itself according to the ontological vector running from its formal cause to its final cause, a paradoxical causality in which there are two distinct essential causes, yet one. So if we again recapitulate these four different kinds of causality that go back to Aristotle in his Physics and his Metaphysics: material, efficient, formal, and final. So every material being in the universe has these four kinds of causes. Whether we're talking about a rock, a particular kind of rock, or water, or a molecular compound like sodium chloride, salt, or we're talking about a more sophisticated configuration of matter, like a particular kind of ape, or a crocodile, or a toucan, or a parrot, or a Burmese python, or a human being, or a star, or a moon, asteroid. We're talking about an element from the periodic table, or we're talking about a subatomic particle that's in constant flux, constant motion, constant mutation. Any instance of material being has all four of these kinds of causes involved in it coming into being, involved in its becoming, involved in its change. And this is fascinating, and this is true, and it's necessary to think this deep in philosophy. I realize it is quite deep. It takes a lot of patience and focus to think about these things, to think about these concepts, which are more steady than matter in motion. And we think about all of this in philosophy by abstracting from matter. Even if we go back to pre-Socratic philosophy, we see this oscillation in the different thinkers, whether we're talking about a Parmenides on one extreme or Heraclitus on the other, and then this attentiveness to what is stable about being and what is unstable about being, what is necessary about being and what is radically contingent and changing about being. So Heraclitus, for his part, is very attentive to the materiality of being that's observable around him, and to say things like, you never walk through the same river twice, he's hitting upon a truth about this world of becoming, this world of fluctuation, this world of mutation. And it's very true. But Parmenides, for his part, says things about being that it is not lacking. If it were, it would lack everything. There's a stability about being, a constancy about being, what we mean by being itself, what we mean by existence itself, and the interrelation across this ontological difference between being itself and beings. So if I were to sum up, just to close this live stream, which I'm really trying to get a lot on the table, mainly because I don't want to make another live stream about causality and just causality. I want to just get this stuff on the table, because where I want to go from here in my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, is to talk about the human soul. And we can talk about the human soul rationally in as much as we've established the veracity of the four kinds of cause, going back to Aristotle, that we find in the work of Thomas Aquinas and Edith Stein. But just to again recapitulate what we mean by final cause in this live stream, we're really driving to what is meant by final cause, this Wozu, Stein says in German, the into which a being is formed and the into which a being becomes, whether living or non-living, in this universe, in this cosmos. So let's just think one final time about final cause. And this is what it takes in philosophy, to think of a thing over and over and over again. We don't just think about it once. We don't just think about it for a while in order to get a good grade on the exam and move on. When it comes to timeless truths, they captivate us into eternity. And I very much enjoy thinking about these things over and over and over again, to make these live streams, to say things in new ways based on things that I said in a certain way before. It's a great joy, and I feel that through this theoria, as Aristotle calls it, this contemplation of being, we actually get to it. We actually get to reality. We're thinking toward the whole. We're committed to this. We will refuse to turn our backs on it. We will refuse the near occasion of reductionism. We will renounce the temptation to minimalism. We will renounce the confusion of the part for the whole. We, as philosophers, if not theologians, if not mystics, are going to commit ourselves to the whole. It is because of the whole that we are parts, and it is toward the whole that we are privileged to think as a gift. And so let us think about final causality one last time in this live stream, in homage to the whole. Why do beings evolve? Why does mass move at subatomic and celestial levels of being and convert into energy, and energy convert into mass? We know this through Einstein's mass energy equivalence equation, E equals mc squared. It's in an equation, and we observe it in stars, mass converting into energy, and nuclear particle accelerators, where energy converts into mass. Is there purpose in all this motion and commotion? Yes, indeed. And metaphysics gives the name teleology to this purposefulness of all motion and ontological interaction. Again, teleology from the Greek word telos, meaning end, termination, conclusion, that sense of Latin, terminus, result, outcome, goal, aim, fulfillment, purpose, or even forever, at last, telos, is the science, the logos of final causes, and inquires into the specific purposes toward which beings move and act. Final cause is that for the sake of which a being acts. Potencies are actualized due to definite predetermined purposes. Electrons, planets, and moons orbit nucleic centers of force according to mutual corporeal attraction and repulsion. Biological organisms eat, drink, and copulate in order to sustain their individual being and perpetuate their kind. Again, biological organisms develop and evolve in order to survive and thrive in their local environments. All that is living lives with purpose, lives with an inherent mission, an intrinsic mission to live, to perpetuate life. Being is not purposeless, but is full of purpose. Moreover, beyond the realm of involuntary inbuilt teleology is voluntary teleology, as I talked about earlier with rational beings like ourselves. We free and voluntary beings act with purpose to achieve desirable ends of action. We write and read and do live stream videos to share knowledge, grow in wisdom, and contemplate truth. We travel from here to there with some specific purpose in mind. We invest time and energy into so many projects and undertakings in order to achieve some specific goal. When we take the time to analyze the interplay between causes and effects, we find that every cause is ordered to a corresponding or reciprocal effect. Isn't that interesting? The relationship between cause and effect, it's as if the effect draws the cause on to cause it. There's something of an erotic relationship between cause and effect, between formal and final cause. Causes cause only in light of their intrinsic effects. No cause causes without due cause to cause. Causes cause because. Causes are the reasons in response to the questions that ask why or why not. And we say in response, because. We point to the cause that is or is not there. Final causes form the bookend to formal causes. In fact, we can think of them as one and the same. Form is always related to function, and function refers to the sake for which some event takes place in the realm of being. Growth, development, reproduction, movement, and even that beings exist in themselves are all the results of formal and final causality. Formal and final causes refer to the invisible, intangible, immaterial, yes, spiritual, and abstract agencies that generate specific beings and ordain their respective ways of being in the world. No being can take credit for its formal or final cause. Each receives, excuse me, each receives these as ontological inheritance and mission. Each being receives its formal and final cause that makes it what it is, as ontological inheritance and mission. If we are to speak of universal natures of being, such as human being, which is of great concern for us, or at least it should be as human beings, then we must appeal to formal and final causality as the metaphysical basis upon which all physical components rest. If not, we readily can interpret ourselves away as body parts, strings, quanta, atomic particles, and their constituents, or sophisticated animals with advanced cephalization at best, or whatever else we might happen to uncall or devocation ourselves. A worldview woven from the restricted fragments of material reductionism is not able to withstand the survival of the fittest and natural selection motifs that rule in a dog-eat-dog world. What then is to prevent racism, sexism, classism, xenophobia, eugenics, genocide, dictatorships, and all other dehumanizing ideologies that rip apart the integral metaphysical meaning of human in the name of reason, which at that point has become very irrational? Final cause secures the concept of universal essence in a world of becoming, insofar as all beings of a common essence and origin are summoned involuntarily and voluntarily to a common destiny. Aristotle refers to the final cause of an evolving organism or being as entelechy. That is the telos within the being that develops or unfolds from the inside out in the case of biological organisms or beings. The full perfection of a being is reached upon the complete unfolding of the being according to its predetermined form. However, in a world of becoming, this fullness of perfected being is approximated at best, especially for personal spiritual beings, because even more potencies remain to be actualized. So we approximate the perfection of our being. We never actually fully actualize it because there's always outstanding potencies that could remain to be actualized. But the actuality of potency itself is testimony to eternal being, which delights to let potency linger into the time of eternity, wherein there is no shortage of possibility, and above all, the possibilities of interpersonal love. Perhaps we can call love the personal agency of all formal and final causes, but that notion, for all its mystery, would take us beyond the categorical range of metaphysics, accessible only, then by the method of phenomenology, the content of theology proper, and the mystical communion of persons, known as the communion of angels and saints, amidst the inner life of the most holy Trinity. So just saying then at the end there, as rational agents, we recognize love as the reason for being. Love as the cause of all secondary causes and effects that we call the universe. Because it is good to be, and because, as Edith Stein says, love is goodness giving itself away, we have the universe. We find ourselves in being. We find ourselves in this dramatic unfolding of becoming. And if we're saying that we become, we're moving between origin and end. We become according to the temporal flux between the no longer and the not yet. And the truth about our being, and when we contemplate it, we arrive at the necessary condition of possibility for our own becoming, for all the becoming that is happening in the universe that we call the universe. And the necessary condition of the possibility of all this becoming is the origin and end in itself, that is being itself. That is the first principle of everything. As Plato said, the unhypothetical first principle of everything else. That it is it not itself the first principle of its own existence. And so in a metaphysical contemplation of being, we arrive at the unity of origin and end, which is absolute being, which is being itself, which is pure act with no admixture of potency with it, which we call divinity, we call God, we call the creator of everything itself that did not create itself and is not necessary to be, that hovers just above nothingness from which it came, to which it will return. And then we are brought to the rationality of theology and a study of divinity's self-revelation to humanity over the course of history and the inbreaking of eternity within the finitude and temporality of history. So as I composed this live stream about 2 hours long, again taking commentary from my 2017 book Human and Divine Being, my 2019 book Metaphysics, a basic introduction in the Christian key, because I just want to sprint through the finish line of thinking about causality for now, again to recall the 4 different kinds of causes, going back to the work of Aristotle, which we see running through Thomas Aquinas and Edith Stein, thinkers like John Paul II, Eric Shavara, now into the 21st century, to own this ourselves as philosophers of the 21st century, and to not turn our backs on perennial philosophy, which alone grants access to the fullness of being, to the whole, which is the pearl of great price, which philosophy is after any philosophy worthy of the name. So thank you for joining me in this live stream. Thank you for thinking along with me. Look forward to future live streams, hopefully coming up tomorrow and following, about how the human soul is the form of the body. Now that we've talked about these different kinds of causality, we can't understand something like the human soul according to material and efficient causality alone. But the soul is a question of spiritual being, of something that is spiritually essential in relation to, we could even say, the non-essentiality of the body that is adapted to the essentiality of the form, the Wesens form of the particular kind of being. And that Wesens form of human is the spiritual soul, the anima forma corporis, the soul is the form of the body. So what we've done at this point is we've set the stage to give ourselves adequate warrant to talk about the spiritual soul a lot. Into many live streams to come, we want to contemplate the human soul, which often goes overlooked or even denied by souls themselves, by human beings themselves, the unity of body and soul. And I really look forward to these future live streams contemplating the human soul. But if you've been following with all these live streams, especially taking from my 2017 book, Human and Divine Being, you've seen that we've gone from thinking about spiritual being and now these 4 kinds of causality, setting up our ability to talk about the soul with all these other things already been established and put in place and rationally demonstrated. Eventually, after spending much time talking about the soul, I want to talk about matter itself, the body, thinking of it in the most scientific, philosophical way possible. But first we begin with spirit and matter follows. So that's very intentional here. And then to talk about things like empathy, more about the logic of the cross with Edith Stein, with her own personal life, the sum total of her philosophical, theological, spiritual writings, and really do a great service to the truth. Thank you so much for joining me. May we all continue to think toward the whole, to pray from the heart, and to live as a witness. We'll see you in the next one.